Welcome to the Hollywood Video Podcast, Episode 2. So, the first episode was explaining the origin and the name of the podcast. Went to the history of Hollywood Video, the store, and that's basically where I got the name from. The general premise of the podcast is going to be about movie reviews, theories, and the like. I think in the inaugural episode, I mentioned Power Rangers, and that got me thinking, what would be better for one of the first episodes than reviewing Power Rangers, the movies, because there's a couple of them. I've got about 4 features and 1 short film. I was almost going to skip the short film, but as I was researching, I'm like, okay, I've got to look into this. It has to be mentioned. So here's what's going to happen. I've got about 5 films, and I'm going to go through each of them and review them, say what I liked, what I didn't like, make some commentary on the level of talent involved. Since I'm a filmmaker myself, I'm probably going to focus on the filmmaking aspect, but I'll talk about other things as well. We're going to go from the order of least to greatest. And I feel like I've enjoyed all of these movies in some capacity, so I'm probably never going to put any one of them through the ringer like, oh, that's just garbage. But let's get started. So the first movie that we're going to review would be Turbo, a Power Rangers movie released in 1997. I remember as a kid, I sort of got the idea of like, I am probably not going to enjoy this as much as the first one, the one from 1995. But I was still curious. I still wanted to check it out. I think perhaps the indication that I wasn't going to like it as much was the fact that the first movie, they shot it like it was a movie. This one, Turbo, they shot it like it was basically an episode of the show. Now, I wouldn't say that this was when Power Rangers was passé. That's too big of a statement. But it had been around for a couple years. It started in 93, and Turbo was going to be its 5th season, and this was going to be the second time that they were doing what had already been done in the Super Sentai series, where there was going to be the annual costume Zord switch. They still had some of the original cast from the previous season, but even that they experimented with. They sort of first experimented with cast changes with, I guess you could say, they sort of experimented with Jason David Frank's character Tommy, because he was the Green Ranger and then he left, and there was enough of an uproar from fans that they had to bring him back. And he's played a Power Ranger the most of any of the other actors. God rest his soul. So they realized that was a part they could immediately adopt. With the second season, they realized they could switch the Zords up, but the characters, they had to wait a bit. They sort of experimented again with Jason David Frank's character, because they used the costume from the Super Sentai equivalent of season 2 and made the White Ranger, and they carried that for at least 2 more seasons. So there was some novelty of using a different costume. But it was going to take a second before they could just do the annual everything gets changed bit, and Turbo was kind of the last chapter of that experiment, because midway through the show, they changed everybody, except for the Blue Ranger, who was a little kid. Of course, he would leave in the next season, Space Rangers, and then after that, the tradition was fully adopted. But to get back to the point, the series it had been around for a little bit. There was kind of, at any moment, some new craze could happen. Pokemon was just around the corner the next year. Sort of stole a bit of Power Rangers thunder. Not too dissimilar from the way that Power Rangers had kind of stolen the thunder from Ninja Turtles. But anyway, it was an experimental phase, and I have this theory about why did they make this movie? Why not just shoot it as a TV pilot? My theory is, having looked up on Wikipedia, this movie was more than a couple $1,000,000 cheaper than the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie from 1995. And what I think they were going to experiment with was the idea of maybe every new season they'd release a movie. This is purely conjecture. I have nothing to base this off of. I haven't scoured any wikis or sites that say, oh, this was the plan. I'm just saying this is what they could have been thinking. And it wouldn't be too difficult. They could get costumes from Toei, from the season of Super Sentai that they were adapting that year. And again, this is just a theory. Who knows if that's what the case was. But the movie didn't do so well. Let's see. According to Wikipedia, it looks like it had a box office of $9.6 million, and they're not showing the budget. But Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie from 1995, that made $66 million worldwide. So it makes sense that they didn't go ahead and like shoot a movie for each season. I think they do something similar in the Super Sentai series. Anyway, so as I said before, I was going to talk about what I like and don't like about each of these movies. So I want to start off by saying what I like about this movie. And it would have to be the theme song. I think the theme song to Turbo, I feel it's like neck and neck with Zeo Ranger's theme song in comparison to being as cool as the first one from Mighty Morphin. That might be a bit of a stretch. But the thing is, this might have just been a marketing thing, but I remember one of the things they would do for the marketing is they had like a short music video for the theme song that would play on Fox Kids. And I thought, this is just cool. And I never heard it on the radio. So I quickly realized, okay, if I want to try to record this song, I've got to put a cassette in the machine, place it next to the TV, and hit record. That was like the only way I could get it. They may or may not have released it on cassette, but I had no way of knowing. So I liked the theme song, and I remember 10 or 9-year-old me, I forget how old exactly, it was 97, so I would have been around, March 97, so I was still 9 technically. So one of the cool things I remember is they brought back Jason and Kimberly. And it's like, I wonder what kind of role they're going to play. And they're sort of hostages in this movie, and so are Bulk and Skull. And for whatever reason, I remember this strange subplot where Bulk and Skull had like amnesia or something, and they spoke with these weird like Austrian or Eastern European accents, and Jason and Kimberly like what's this? But it was sort of a cool, it seems silly to say nostalgia because this was just 1997 and they'd each been gone from the show for maybe a year or two. But it was just a cool throwback. And it was interesting to see them because there's a brief moment in the film where they get possessed by like the main villain of this movie. And we'd seen Rangers be evil before, but usually it was they're evil and then they become good. So these guys had already been good, but I guess they're not Power Rangers anymore. So, and another interesting thing was this was like the only Ranger series where they had a kid be a Ranger. And I guess the whole idea was he was about the same age as the audience, so kids could project themselves onto him. And to not make it look silly and to match up with the Super Sentai footage, in his morphing sequence, he's in the suit, he puts on the mask, and then it shows him grow a bit. Now, this movie, as far as Power Rangers movies go, is not my favorite for a reason. I remember when I was a kid, I saw this. I didn't see it in theaters. I don't think that I felt as compelled to see it in theaters. And like I said before, it looking too close to the quality of the show, or maybe I should say the shooting style of the show, that was probably a factor. But I did want to see it on VHS, and from what I've researched, while the movie did not nearly as good in theaters as the previous movie, I think it dominated on the home video market, even if kids saw it and weren't thrilled with it. Now, I've heard previous comments that the sort of first cut of the movie was 3 hours long and there were a bunch of subplots that just got axed. But I wonder how true that is, because if this was supposed to be a smaller, cheaper film than the first one, then I feel like they would pay extra close attention to not shoot all that extra stuff. Like, they would have taken care of that in the script. But then again, supposedly, according to Steve Cardenas, they shot for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie in 95. They shot this whole thing where Dulcia was portrayed by Mariska Hargitay. And then they realized, oh, we want to go a different direction. So they cut her and that story element and reshot it. So what do I not like about this movie? I kind of feel like this movie is very dialogue heavy and not in the good way. I feel like characters talk about stuff happening. Like there's a lot of talking and then something cool is about to happen, but then something else happens. Like when they get in their cars that turn into the Zords, that's when we hear the music play, like the theme song, and you think some cool action sequence is about to happen, but it doesn't. I remember there is a subplot of a martial arts tournament that happens, and that explains how Rocky, he has an accident where he suffers an injury, so he can't be a Power Ranger anymore for whatever reason. Even though in the in-universe, I'm sure they could have had Zordon or Alpha or somebody heal him, but usually when these things happen, there was always a dispute with the producers and the actors about pay, and they were getting written off of the show. So of course, they don't think too deeply about it. And the audience didn't. We didn't know all that stuff. Wouldn't find out for years later. Anyway, yeah, just it doesn't have the same sort of story flow as the first movie, which I will get to towards the end of this podcast. In a way, I kind of feel like they were just trying to set up kids for the TV show, which, I mean, we've had 3 or 4 years of the show at this point, so it's like, what do we need set up? And if they were trying to be cheap, if they were trying to save money, let's say, and they could have made a way more interesting movie with the budget they had, and probably for even cheaper, because they were already shooting it like the show. So I don't know why they couldn't have just talked with Toei, and this movie basically just did not have enough action sequences. They needed more of that, and the action sequences that were in there, they weren't great. And this may just sound like an old millennial complaining about a kid's movie, but but it's not. I remember thinking this all the way back in 1997. I could probably still watch the movie and get some kind of enjoyment about it, but I'd much rather watch Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. The most noticeable thing about this is that it was directed by David Winning and Shuki Levy. Shuki Levy he's been with Saban forever, and he did a lot of music for the show. And David Winning, from what I can tell, he's a TV and film director. One of the things you're going to find out, seeing common as I talk about directors on this, is that there are a lot of directors who are mostly focused on doing TV work mostly. But anyway, I guess the reason there was like 2 directors on this was Shuki was familiar with the franchise, knew what it looked like, knew what it didn't look like, and David Winning was sort of a hired hand who demonstrated, he can get things done on a budget, on time, which was a focus of theirs. So yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about this other than they could have made it a lot better, but at the same time, this was a 90s kids movie, and Power Rangers is already known for being cheesy, so it's like, they probably, in an alternate timeline, they probably just made this the TV pilot, and we probably would be remembering it much more fondly. But then again, there are people who enjoy it. Jason David Frank's daughter, when I met her at a meet and greet, said when she was grounded, she would sneak the Turbo movie and watch it, and I thought that was really cute. So yeah, I may have to go watch that movie again, if only for that mentioning. So yeah, the next movie on this list is, oh boy, the battery's getting low. Power / Rangers from 2015. This one is noticeable because it has several talented people in it. Most notably, the director, Joseph Kahn. Joseph Kahn has had a long, storied career directing music videos from everybody from Lady Gaga to the Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift. Yeah, I think he's only had really 1 or 2 movie experiences, and from what I can tell, they haven't been great. I haven't seen them, but I know his music video work pretty well. I feel like I'm mispronouncing the name. The other noticeable name on this is Adi Shankar, who's a producer. He did that Judge Dredd movie, which it looked cool. From what I've heard, it's received way better than the Sylvester Stallone version from the 90s. One of the few times you'll hear me say something somewhat dismissive about the 90s, but yeah. So this is sort of the second least favored of these movies. And again, it's really short. I think the movie is under 20 minutes long. One of the rumors I heard through the grapevine was supposedly Jason David Frank was approached to be in this, but he said no because Power Rangers they're still making Power Rangers, and it's aimed at kids. Yeah, which I can understand that. A lot of former Rangers, they watched this and they thought it was cool and interesting and intriguing. One of the only people from the original series to be in it was Carla Perez, who would play Rita in the American shot footage for Power Rangers. Because as you all know, they ran out of Super Sentai footage, I believe in season 1 or season 2. And so when you would see Rita and Zed, that was stuff the Americans shot. And she was one of the only ones who showed up in this version. This was a time sort of when dark and gritty reboots was a thing everyone was talking about. And we all wanted a dark and gritty reboot for everything. I think we just figured, oh, it worked for Christopher Nolan and Batman. It's got to be applicable to everything. I think the most ridiculous thing I heard about once was they were planning a dark, gritty origin story for Santa Claus. Yeah, let that sink in. But anyway, this movie was noticeable because Saban, this was not one of their projects. So Saban went after it pretty hard. It got removed from YouTube and Vimeo, both where it was posted. I guess eventually they relented, and the project is still up on both platforms. You can probably go look it up. So the premise is the Machine Empire, the bad guys from Zeo Rangers, they fight against the Power Rangers, they win, and then they sign a truce with the governments of Earth. And the Pink Ranger is held hostage by the Red Ranger, who turned into an agent of the machines. And they talk about how all the other Power Rangers up until that point had died. And it ends with Tommy fighting Rocky, at least this version, and then finds out that who he thinks is Kimberly is actually Rita in disguise, and that she was responsible for the deaths of all these Rangers. Yeah, it's one of the noticeable lines is they say the machines and meth was just better. So yeah, this goes for the whole dark, gritty thing, and part of me wonders if this isn't a critique of that trend where everything had to be dark and gritty, showing like, again, the movie has phenomenal production value. You would almost think this was a studio-backed project. I think, yeah, it's like, it probably is one of the best looking of these movies from a purely technical standpoint. But again, that could be because it is a short. They got James Vanderbeek to play Rocky, Katie Sackhoff to play Kimberly, and those are the only actors I know of. Oh, they got Carla Perez to play Rita. I said that already, but it's worth mentioning again because I met her at a convention and she had a wonderful sense of humor. I went up to her and said, oh, we should both pretend that we're having a headache in our selfie, because she had that line of, oh, I've got such a headache, somebody bring me an aspirin. And she asked me to send her that photo on Instagram. So thank you, Carla. Anyway, I was intrigued. I watched it. I think my favorite thing about this is the opening sequence where they're running, they're fighting, and it pans up and you see the Megazord fighting against a machine bad guy. While the opening is my favorite part, it is also my least favorite part because it shows the Rangers with like actual guns, not like their laser guns or some variation. And I guess it's because, oh, guns are dark and gritty. As I think about it, I'm really leaning into the idea that this was a critique of that whole edict. Everything has to be dark and gritty. But I feel like I'm getting repetitious. An interesting note is this idea that Jason and Kimberly in this movie are going to get married. I feel like there were hints of that in the Turbo Power Rangers movie. I think they might have removed that from a test screening or something. I heard rumors that there was a subplot that ultimately got axed. And what I think is interesting about that is there was none of that in the show. I think rumors of that from Turbo was a thing, but actually, in retrospect, it did sort of feel like they were vibing a bit in Turbo when they're held in captivity. But I don't know, you could equally argue the other way around. But it's interesting that they picked up into that. And then also, they almost did that in the 2017 Power Rangers reboot movie. But what do I like about Power Slash Rangers? The production value. I think the thing that I liked the most is that it gave Joseph Kahn room to flex his talent with a work of narrative fiction, because I think it's a real shame that we haven't seen more of that in films, but he's a master at the craft of music videos. So maybe that's where he's most comfortable. I know Ridley Scott was, or is. No, I don't know that he's done commercials or music videos in forever. His brother Tony was for sure. He would always shoot commercials, music videos. But anyway, yes, my favorite thing about this is that it gave Joseph Kahn room to flex. And yeah, I sort of feel with JDF on that, like, you can only do the whole dark and gritty thing to such an extent. I mean, the whole premise of Power Rangers is, it is cheesy and it is silly and it is aimed at kids. Like, there's this sort of like surreal idiosyncratic quality, because when you think about dark and gritty, if you take it to that logical extent, it kind of removes the fun from it. Now, I think what a lot of people meant at the time, or one of the interpretations of dark and gritty, was just high production value. And that wasn't a concept we weren't not foreign to. I don't know if I said that. It wasn't an unknown thing to us then, because the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie was a bump up in movie quality. It looked like a film and not the show. And I think that's one of the reasons why Turbo, going back to that briefly, didn't do so great, because it didn't look like something that we couldn't also see on TV. So why go to the theaters to see it? Yeah, I guess the other thing I would have to say is nobody in that short delivered a poor or bad performance. I think everybody was just doing that project for fun. I don't know if anybody got paid. Maybe, maybe not. But it was a fan project, although as far as a pretty well-polished one. I know that Adi Shankar, one of the things he talked about was there are a lot of fan projects on the internet and they all kind of get a pass. But like he said, there's always some sort of technical flaw or quality irregularity that fans will give a pass to for it. And he wanted to make something that you didn't need a pass, that no, it really does look as good as it could look. Yeah, so I enjoy it, but if there's more Power Ranger stuff like it in that exact same tone and vein, it's like, I don't know, it's just grim. And that kind of leads to sort of the happy middle ground, Power Rangers 2017. I remember hearing about this and being pumped that, like, yes, Power Ranger, this was a couple years after Power Slash Rangers, so the 27 reboot directed by Dean Israelite, I remember getting pumped for this. I remember one of the things that people were worried about was the suits. There was a criticism that they looked too different from the show, and some people just said they looked way too much like Iron Man. But it didn't bug me as much as I thought. Yeah, so the premise for the 2017 reboot is they kind of changed the characters from this is basically essentially a reboot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers with the same characters, but they're changed a little bit. Zach is Asian American, Billy is African American, Trini, I don't think her last name is Kwan. Trini is, I believe, Hispanic, and I think that Jason and Kimberly are some kind of white. Although Kimberly's character played Jasmine in the Aladdin live action movie, so she could pass for a couple things. So the movie starts off with this big battle between Rita, who's revealed to be the Green Ranger. That's their way of saying that's how she got the green power coin. And she's defeated all the Rangers. Zordon is the Red Ranger, and he has Alpha crash the ship, I believe, into Earth, and that knocks out Rita, and she gets found several thousand years later, or millions, I forget what they say. Meanwhile, all the Rangers, they meet in detention, and oh yeah, Jason's dad is played by the actor who plays shoot, I forgot the dude's name. Roy. They get Roy from The Office to play Jason's dad, which is hysterical. So they all meet in detention, which none of the Power Rangers were ever in detention in the show. Interestingly enough, the show always began with recruit 5 teenagers with attitude, and yet they were these model citizens that always helped kids, and yeah, it's funny. So it's kind of interesting that they're in detention, which I think would probably warrant attitude. So my favorite thing about this would probably have to be, spoiler alert for a movie that's been out for 8 years at this point. When they finally suit up in their Zords, they play the Power Rangers theme song from the 95 movie, and then they go into battle. This was probably the height of everybody trying to do dark and gritty, but this doesn't go as bad as Power / Rangers. Dean Israelite he's a millennial, or he's one of the older millennials. So he was sort of in that age bracket of when the show was made. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was influenced to keep it from going full on dark. Anyway, it's a fun little superhero movie. It was probably good. I will say it was probably good that it was released when it was, as opposed to, say, the early 2000s. I feel like if it had been made in, say, the early 2000s, everything that you could think of as a superhero movie was trying to be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. And I probably would have preferred that. But the problem is, it was still so close to the original show coming out that they probably would have stood a better chance with getting the original actors versus hiring new guys. And the show was still in the throes of its popularity. And this is maybe just a couple years after the early years of what was Pokemania had died down. And I think Disney had the rights to Power Rangers at that point, if it was going to be an early 2000s film. As far as movies that do, I will say, if it shares a fault with Power / Rangers, is that it does maybe take itself a bit too seriously. Like, I will say, I like how they did the putties, like these kind of rock monsters that they're sort of these golems, like more like the traditional monster, not Gollum from Lord of the Rings. These sort of rock formation monsters. Yeah, it was interesting. I feel like if that's how putties were a real solid threat, they'd look like that. So that was pretty good. And Goldar, I don't hate how they made him this sort of mass sentient monster literally made out of gold. In the show, he was sort of this golden armored flying ape monster, which there's no hint of that at all. And I guess the fault of this movie in particular is they try to make sense of things a bit too much, and it's not a huge problem. In fact, me even saying this feels a bit too close to nitpicking. But Alpha training the Rangers to fight and then remembering stuff he says, like I feel like they should have taken a bit more from the show where like they just know how to do this stuff, even though some of the Rangers were martial artists and some of them weren't. And they could have come up with an easy thing of like the suits gave them that fighting ability. I mean, yeah, it's nitpicking. Oh, I have to mention there's one thing I don't like, and of course it's the constant product placement of Krispy Kreme donuts. Obviously, Krispy Kreme must have put a lot of money into this movie because just about every word Rita says is Krispy Kreme, Krispy Kreme. You could probably make a drinking game, and I'm sure somebody already has, with how many times she says that. Oh, and see the Walter White. I felt so bad for forgetting the guy's name. I should have looked this up. Bryan Cranston. He made a great Zordon, and his take on it was great. Fun fact, you probably know this already, but Bryan Cranston actually did voice work on the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for some of the monsters. And in fact, it's from his last name, where they got the last name for David Yost's character, Billy Cranston. So they immortalized him twice. Let's see. I've got some other things to look up. Power Rangers. Yes, so anyway, I guess it's been a long day. And I keep going. Okay, so anyway, I guess if there was one thing I would complain about, it would be the Zords. They look too alien. Like, I guess one of the explanations is that the Zords take the form of the most powerful creatures on the Earth at the time. And in Earth's case, it would have been dinosaurs. So that kind of makes sense, but it kind of goes back to the whole point of like, they try to make too much sense of everything. But again, this is it. I do feel kind of like I'm almost nitpicking, but at the same time, it was like they could have just as well not had that and people would be fine. I guess if there was one thing I didn't like else about it, it would have been the Megazord. Like it again, it's cool to see something called Megazord, but it looks so different from the TV show version. And I didn't let that dissuade me from seeing it and enjoying the movie, because I did enjoy this movie. Oh, Bill Hader. I have to remember. Bill Hader is the voice of Alpha 5, which is like perfect. I remember when I found that, I'm like, that works so well. Like, especially when he's like, ay, 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 ay. He, for a movie version that's a reboot, that's trying to make itself its own thing, he takes over wonderfully from Richard Horvitz, and yeah, it works really well. I think they tried to do a couple voices, when they were developing the character, and he's like, can I just do my own voice, which works great. And I love it when he says right before they take the Zords off into battle, go, go, Power Rangers. Like, they work in like a catchphrase so naturally. And yeah. Oh, I guess the thing that I like the most of this movie is the cameo of Jason David Frank and Amy Jo Johnson. When people saw that in the movie, they're like, yes. And on an unrelated note to anything having to do with the movie, the premiere of the movie brought a lot of the old Rangers back together. And that was cool to see them at the premiere. And would it have been fun to see a sequel to this? Yes. But at the same time, it did a serviceable job. I think what we would have liked to have seen most likely was kind of a similar uptick in polish and finesse as the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie from 1995. Basically, make something stylistically similar to the 1995 Power Rangers movie, but with just a little bit more high quality. And I think we would have gotten a sequel. And maybe just a bit sillier, not like Marvel laugh a minute silly, but just not have to be so logical about things. And again, I feel like I'm nitpicking, but if there had been a sequel, I would have seen it. And apparently they were planning for 7 movies. The one thing that I'm kind of happy about, would have been really cool to see a Green Dragon Zord in the sequel. And but that goes into my reason why I'm glad they didn't do a sequel is there's an end credit sequence where they're in the classroom and there's a green jacket and there's a roll call and it says, Tommy Oliver, Tommy Oliver. So apparently there was going to be Tommy in the sequel. And some people are miffed about not seeing that, but maybe I would feel differently in an alternate universe where Jason David Frank is still alive, but I'm glad that there isn't some other actor taking on that role. Maybe it could happen sometime in the future, but just not now. And the second best movie in, as far as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movies, would have to be Once and Always from 2023. I didn't know this, but apparently David Yost, aka Billy, he had been pushing for a movie of some kind for an anniversary thing to be made, even though he is not listed as one of the writers for Once and Always. What makes this unique is the fact that Thuy Trang, who played the Yellow Ranger, Trini, in the first 2 seasons, she died in a car crash in 2002, and this worked that into the story. The movie opens up with a battle sequence between a robotic version of Rita Repulsa and the Putties and the Rangers in their Mighty Morphin costumes. And Rita sends a lethal attack at Billy, and Trini jumps in front of it in her outfit and is just disintegrated. And I think it's been a while since I saw it, but Rita even makes this mention of you want dark and serious, as though kind of a reference to some of the other stuff I've talked about. And now the way they did that was, of course, they pulled audio from the show of Thuy Trang. And yeah, but it was like one of those things where it was rough enough having the actress pass away in the early 2000s. And in a way, you could sort of believe that, oh, her character lived on. And now that wasn't the case. And so the plot is Rita's planning something big. She's kidnapping Rangers. And Billy and Zach, they're sort of their whole thing is they're caregivers for Trini's daughter, Min, played by Charlie Kirsch. And Charlie learns what it means to be a Ranger, and winds up taking over the mantle of Yellow Ranger from her mom. And it's about 50 minutes, and it pays sort of a wonderful homage to the Power Rangers franchise at that point was 30 years old. And it ends with a flashback to an episode where Kimberly is playing a song on her guitar, and you see all of them there, and they're younger, and the sort of closing credit card says, "In memory of Twee Trang and Jason David Frank." So it leaves you feeling all kinds of like bittersweetness, but ultimately feeling good. So the story is great. I think this is sort of the culmination of what we'd want to see of the new movies so far. This one does it the best. Now, certainly nostalgia is a factor, but also they work off of like a real life thing that happened. And they craft a wonderful story about that. And I've had the pleasure of meeting 3 actors who were in the movie. The first one I interacted with, I remember Charlie Kirsch. She posted about something from the movie, and I made this comment, which was basically saying like, "You're doing such justice to this character and the franchise, and we thank you for that," or something along those lines. And I wasn't expecting any kind of response, but she sends me a DM message on Instagram saying, "I'm honored by your words." And that blew my mind. It was like, I have this thing where I'm in like my late 30s, and when I saw Power Rangers, I was a little kid, and the Power Rangers, they were teenagers, they were the big kids. And because I saw it at that time, I have that sort of deference just hardwired into me. Like, as the show progressed and I got older, they were still teenagers. And even when I was a teenager, I had this mindset of like, oh, I'm the little kid and they're the big kids. And then I even get a little bit older, but I still have that mindset of like, I have this mindset of deference to actors who are Power Rangers, even if they're younger. And at this point, by this time happened, I'm like twice Charlie Kirsch's age. And I remember when, even though it's just like sending me a direct message saying like, "I'm honored by your words," I was put back into that place of like, oh, I'm 5 and she's the big kid, even though that makes no sense at all. And it was certainly not the case. It's just neurologically, I was taken back to that sort of mindset. And yeah, and I met Steve Cardenas, who played Rocky in this years ago, just a couple years before the first sort of Power Rangers convention started. And yeah, so that was surreal. I don't know that he had any clue that any of that was coming up, but it's been wonderful to see him sort of find that love and embrace it. It's great. And most recently, I had the pleasure of meeting Catherine Sutherland for the first time, and what an absolute gem of a person. I could have met her the same time where I met Steve Cardenas again in 2024. And that was cool. I cry whenever I meet any Power Ranger for the first time, except for Charlie Kirsch. And I think that is because I didn't want to trauma dump on a kid, because that's the age. Movie, 1995. I've said that this is the best of these movies out of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Turbo Power Rangers movie, Power/Rangers, Power Rangers 2017, and Once and Always. It's the best one, and to a degree, we can't really be objective. I feel that nostalgia is going to be a key factor in this. Um, but even if we take that away, I still say that this is the best one. And I'll tell you why. I think that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, 1995, I'm just going to call it MMPR movie from this point out. It's the best one for a few reasons. It's the best one because I think the first thing is, this will sound funny, but the script. It has the opposite issue of Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, and even some of the other movies I've mentioned on this. There's really no sort of filler in this movie. There's not stuff to just pad out time to say, oh, we've got a feature. Once and Always, I don't think it had any filler. Number one, because they settled on a 50-ish minute special, and that worked for them. But MMPR, the movie, I think it has the best script, and it's in the sense that it's sort of a classic 3-act structure, and kind of the best example of a classic 3-act structure in all of these movies. Now, it does have the advantage of a TV show setting up all the characters, so I don't have to really waste time on that. But it introduces the premise, sets up plot points, perhaps the best of all these movies I've mentioned thus far. And even if you had no familiarity with the show, you basically get the idea of like, okay, they're a team, they're friends pretty easily. And you think, oh, these are people I'd like to hang out with. And it does this thing of everything leading up into the next scene, like pretty well. Like where the last scene ended, the next scene begins. And it also uses perhaps the best example of like AB storylines. And those usually sort of converge from a single storyline. Okay, this is, So for much of the second act, the AB storyline is the Rangers are on their way to Edenoi to find the Ninjetti power. And the B storyline is, meanwhile, back on Earth, Ivan is up to mischief. And it all comes together in the third act when the Rangers come back and they have to fight him. It also works that none of the scenes are slow. They serve some purpose. Like there's either something happening, and if there's exposition for a reason. It helps move things forward. So there's that. What else? I suppose if there's really one scene that feels off, it's the scene where Dulcia has gone off and the Rangers are kind of just hanging around this plateau, and then Tommy says, it's time, and then they start going. I mean, I guess it works thematically. And again, I was 8 when I saw this movie. And so then they go off on their adventure to go seek the great power. Now, part of me wonders if the writers are thinking like there needed to be something in between the B storylines. Like there are these two. My guess is there were 2 B storyline scenes and they needed to be interrupted. I feel like that's why that scene is in there, rather than think, okay, well, how can we combine these 2 scenes? That's just my guess. But again, it feels like a nitpick. Now, I will say this about the script. There are plot points that there are plot holes you could drive a truck through. But I would say this has more to do with like, this is fantastical and surreal and silly. and it isn't meant to be taken too seriously. Um, but at the same time, it feels epic and grandiose, and it's an adventure. Um, I know that Siskel and Ebert hated this movie. Big surprise. Adults in the 90s hated the Power Rangers movie. Amy Jo Johnson at the time said it's like a mixture of The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars. And I forget which one, Gene Siskel or anyway, the fat one. He said he had wondered if she saw either of those movies. But actually, I think it makes a lot more sense than he'd give her credit for. Um, so one thing that can't be avoided is the CG. It's dated looking. But I will say this. There's a lot of CG from movies of this era that had big proper budgets, and the cracks have started to show. This is like $100 budget movies. This movie had 15 million. Now, I was watching this VFX artist react thing, and they reviewed this movie, and they said, imagine you're a VFX artist in 1995, and you don't have decades of CGI experience to work off of. You're basically kind of laying the groundwork. Like the biggest CGI thing happened a few years ago. Like the two big moments were Terminator 2 Judgment Day in 91 and Jurassic Park in 93. There wasn't a lot to fall back on, and they had a puny budget. I've already said it. And you can say it doesn't look that bad. I mean, it kind of does. But at the same time, like the chrome on the Megazords, you could say like, okay, this doesn't look like how light would actually interact with these objects. And it seemed there was like no ray tracing whatsoever. Like, you get the feeling that they tried to light these models in the battle scene as best they could. But again, CG was new and it was a kid's thing. But this was the movie version of the cheesy show with miniatures and spandex, and this was a big plus. And if you look at if you look at something like the Joel Schumacher Batman movies, which were superhero movies, and they were some of the earliest experiments of CG in a superhero movie, and they have a much bigger budget, it's not that much better. So I'll give the CG team props for that. Also acting wise, I've heard supposedly from some of the actors themselves that they've sort of criticized themselves. I won't say which actor, and said, if you pay attention, we didn't have that big lines. And I think that they had a range and they didn't stray out of it. Like, that feels fair to me. And like, props to them for getting Paul Freeman to play Ivan Ooze. Fun fact, he was the priest from Shaun of the Dead. That is like the other thing that I know him from. The one who says, Nicholas, you may not be a man of God, but surely you're a man of peace. Let's see. I feel like he basically chews the scenery and steals the show. And even critics who hated this movie singled out his performance as he was the entertainment for the adults. And from a writing perspective, you probably get the feeling that the writers had the most fun writing his dialogue. And he's been in other stuff. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Let's see. Oh, wow. He's been in quite a few other things. But the thing that stands out to me is him being in Hot Fuzz. I was like, oh, wow, the priest is Ivan Ooze. So I'm probably spending the most time on this one because it's sort of like the most special. The premise is pretty great. I mean, it's not complex, but complexity doesn't mean greatness necessarily. There's a new threat, Ivan Ooze. The Rangers try to take him down, but then their mentor is struck down and they have to go seek this new power. And at the risk of over-intellectualizing a kid's show, I'm going to over-intellectualize a kid's show. So you would think that Ivan Ooze was unearthed really close to where everybody is. And the great power is so far off. Like, they got to go travel across the universe to find it. And it's one of those things of like, well, why is the bad guy so close? Why didn't they fling him across space? And why is the great power so far away? And I think it's that thing, and it's fair to ask that of this show. The real simple answer can be, well, they need the story to move along and they need something to happen. But you look at old myths and stuff, and I think the reason, like, oh, the evil is so close is it says that everybody is just basically a stone's throw away from making a really bad choice, and it's so close and so present. And when that bad choice does manifest or come about, it takes so much effort to reverse course that you might as well travel across the universe, that you gotta go the distance. And like, it's way easier to ruin things than it is to reconstruct and rebuild and edify. That takes so much more work. Like, destruction is easy, creation is exorbitantly hard. But in the end, you can destroy evil. I also want to take a note of the composer Graham Revell. It's kind of amazing that they got him to be in this, because you can tell that they were going for very John Williams, James Horner vibes. And because this was the 90s, this was kind of right before the kind of Hans Zimmer minimalism became the mainstay. Everybody was still trying to sound lush and romantic in their scores. And I love Hans Zimmer's work. I think it's amazing. But at the same time, he became the standard, and the sort of lush romanticism fell away a bit, at least in the US. Also, it is worth noting that Graham Revell has done a wide range of things. The two works of his that I know of, aside from Power Rangers, are Pineapple Express in 2008 and The Crow. I mean, all three of these are so wildly different from one another. Let's see, sorry, y'all, just thinking of something. But anyway, I guess I'm pausing and thinking because I really want to give this one my attention. Interesting thing about this director, Brian Spicer, and it's funny, he kind of has this in common with the other directors. Prior to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, he was mostly a television director, and he directed 3 films in the 90s. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, McHale's Navy, and then For Richer or Poor. McHale's Navy came out 2 years after Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, and For Richer or Poor came out, the same year. Now, I didn't find this out till much later, but MMPR the movie and For Richer or Poor, they use a similar camera technique. If you pay attention throughout both movies, you'll see that Brian Spicer uses a lot of dolly shots where the camera moves in on a character. there's not a lot of still camera work, and it isn't in that sort of Michael Bay way. It's just that like there's a lot of start off with a wide shot and then move in on a character. Um, and it works. Part of me wonders if he did this because he came from a television background, and at the time, camera work on TV, and even to this day somewhat, was more conservative. You had the establishing shot, and then if a scene was dialogue, it was one character's like medium shot or headshot and another character's medium shot or headshot. And occasionally you get like a close up, either of a person or an object. And you kind of feel like he's trying to take advantage of the fact that he has a schedule that permits him a bit more wiggle room. Like we can think about where to place the camera a bit more. We're not so rushed. And it's very interesting that he only made 3 movies. As of this podcast, the last movie he directed was For Rich or Poor in 1997, and he's still alive. After that, he returned to television, and I guess he liked television a lot. I guess he needed that sort of, he realized he needed the brisk pace, the deadlines. For some people, that that constraint helps. Who knows what it would have looked like if he had directed more movies. Sometimes you get a Sidney Lumet, a director of television, transitions to films, and then they take those TV sensibilities and they run with it. I guess he just felt like with Sidney Lumet, he was able to he developed his sensibilities from the tight deadlines of television, where he had to make very split-second decisions. And because of that, he was able to shoot movies in a similar way. And he was able to manage a lot of resources very proficiently, where other directors who only had the luxury of film shoots as their experience, they might freeze. But he thrived in that. Now, Brian Spicer, I guess he was just the opposite, and who knows? It is interesting that all the directors mentioned in this video, they all have such a similar background. You look up any one of them, and with maybe the exception of Dean Israelite, but even him and Joseph Kahn and the others, they were all TV directors. And I can't help but wonder if that was Haim Saban's decision of, number one, he's a businessman first and foremost. I don't think he was trying to make art to inspire children. He's like, no, I want to make money. I mean, part of that is probably what led to Power Rangers creation. Like, oh, we can use the fight scene from the Japanese show and replace it with American actors to make it appeal to American kids. It was very economically minded. And I bet you if there was a Japanese movie, he would have somehow done the same thing, but that wasn't the case. Maybe in some alternate timeline. But to get back to it, I guess TV directors were chosen because specifically, TV directors were chosen because they knew how to work within a very tight deadline with limited resources. So you give them that extra room, they'll have no problem delivering on time. That's my theory. And now I will probably say that Dean Israelite and Joseph Kahn, they probably weren't just seen as sort of the journeyman filmmaker, as Quentin Tarantino calls them. They were perhaps seen as, hey, let's allow these guys to be a bit more creative. But even they had similar experiences. Dean Israelite had a lot of experience with short films, which is somewhat akin to TV shows. And Joseph Kahn, he was one of the music video directors of the 90s, as I mentioned before. And Joseph Kahn had the advantage of he was working with a short film, so he could make it sing better than if he was working within the constraints of a feature. But I would say that perhaps Brian Spicer, of all the directors who has worked on any of these Power Ranger films, probably shone the brightest. And I'm not just saying that because he made the movie that I've got a soft spot for, that is perhaps more than a little, probably generously blinded by nostalgia. I would say that he had the most difficult circumstances to deal with. Number one, certainly it was like a big effects film, and he was with some effects that weren't totally proven yet. I mean, they were so brand new that people were still sort of writing the rules and working with an established franchise. Anyway, so it's really interesting that this movie kind of means two different things to me. The first thing is, it was a movie I was hyped to see as a kid, but I'm going to sound like a broken record. After my parents' divorce, it took on a whole different thing. It had a whole other subplot to it. After that, it became about, sometimes something so horrible happens that you lose that magic, you lose that spark, and you got to go to such great distances to recapture it. But the good news is that you can. That spark, that magic that you lose, you can get it again. Now, let's see. There is one more movie that I'm going to give an honorable mention to, and the movie hasn't even come out yet. But given that it was the final work of Jason David Frank, it feels worth mentioning. That movie is Legend of the White Dragon. Now, the movie is not a Power Rangers movie, but that being said, it's a Power Rangers movie without being one. I suppose it's the dark, gritty take, and I'll probably do a review of the movie when it comes out. It is the sort of dark, gritty Power Rangers that Jason David Frank felt comfortable making. I kind of feel that this was sort of him saying goodbye to working in Power Rangers. I feel that in another timeline where he was still alive, he would have gone on to do other projects. And one of the reasons he didn't appear in Once and Always was because he said, I'm not going to do any more Power Ranger stuff. I've done so much, and I think it's time to let that go. And that feels pretty reasonable. Amy Jo Johnson had kind of a funny reason for not being in Once and Always. She said, maybe I don't want to be a 50-year-old person like trying to fit into spandex. And I mean, I'm not 50. I mean, I'm only not even in my 40s yet. That's like a couple years away. But I mean, it's like, I can understand that. But I feel like it was him sort of finally closing the chapter on that part of his life and trying to go on to other things. I think people would always know him for Power Rangers, and he was never gonna just like shun that or like say, I'm not gonna participate. He would still be at the conventions. He would still have Power Rangers paraphernalia because he knew how much of a thing that meant to people. And I suppose that Legend of the White Dragon was his way of sort of acknowledging how much Power Rangers had done, but that it was time to move forward. There's one sort of melancholy thought that comes to mind. He was just on the cusp of turning 50 when he passed. And, you know, it's one of those things where I'm like, I will probably reach my 50s. It's not too far off. Man, it's only 12 years away. It's a sobering thought to think that I might outlive him. And it's one of those things where there's this thing where after I found out all the stuff that he's gone through, I feel like we have something in common. And granted, he has been far more successful than me, but I feel like him and me are both those types of people that try our hardest, that we go so hard and put in so much effort towards things. And I feel like if we have that in common, there might be something else we have in common. And one of the things that I feel is I have this feeling of I've never done enough, that no matter how hard I've tried, I could have done better. And in the aftermath, I'll see photos of him, and it's hard to see photos of him and look into his eyes, and I feel like I can see that same feeling of, did I do enough? And it's like, you want to tell him, like, dude, you did so much. Well, anyway, I should end the video on that, but I've got one more thing I want to cover. Now, there are going to be other Power Rangers movies because there's a fan base. People buy into it. And like the question is, which director would be a good pick for the next Power Rangers movie? Because Power Rangers 2017 wasn't quite, it was solid. I'd give it a B. But it wasn't what we wanted for a reboot or a movie version. Now, interestingly enough, really I've got one person in mind who could do this. And one director who I think could do a pretty good job of directing a Power Rangers movie is the director John M. Chu. And I'm basing that decision, first off, from a strange choice, Step Up 3D. Some people might go, what? Well, here's my criteria. First off, I'll be a little nostalgic. I saw Step Up 3D when I was feeling not so great at a point in my life. And my sister said, let's go see a movie. And it had sort of Power Rangers-ish vibes. It was about group camaraderie, coming together, going towards a goal, and teaming up. And in the end, the good guys win. So there's that aspect. He's also worked on other things. I feel like the other thing he worked on was G.I. Joe Retaliation, which if you saw the first G.I. Joe, the one with Channing Tatum, that one looks kind of silly. But he steps in and he doesn't make it Dark Knight Rises, but he gives it just a tiny bit more grit and realism to where, okay, this is all ridiculous, but it's just a little bit more grounded and believable. So I think he could avoid the pratfalls of the 2017 movie. So that's just my sort of last little commentary. Also, he's made some wildly successful movies. Crazy Rich Asians and Wicked. Oh, and he did that Justin Bieber movie. And, oh, we did another one. I was not aware of that. Well, so this has been me ranking all the Power Rangers movies that we have so far. I really didn't think it would last this long, but here we are. I will say this. I might feel differently about all of them, but they all mean something to me. Even the one that I don't feel so strongly for. And I will say I've met, people say never meet your heroes, but I'll say this. I'm so thankful that has not been my experience. I've met more than a couple Power Rangers and people involved with the show, and it's only been positive. They've been wonderful, lovely people, and I have no reason to doubt that won't be the same thing next time I meet other rangers. So this has been the Hollywood Video Podcast. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. Go watch a movie, because a movie is different from an internet video. Have a nice day. Bye.